Vienna. Beautiful place. It's hard to disagree with that. But it's also hard to imagine it in bloody conflict. But if you take yourself back to 1683, you'll find yourself in the middle of a spectacular fight between the Christian armies of the Habsburgs and the Ottoman Empire. Vienna's destiny was at stake as the Ottoman army under the command of Sultan Mehmed IV besieged the city. Vienna was the final significant stronghold, obstructing the Ottomans' decades-long expansion of their empire into Central Europe. The city was subjected to constant bombardment for 2 grueling months. But the timely arrival of a relief army made up of soldiers from Poland, the Holy Roman Empire, and other European allies turned the tide. The siege was broken, and the Ottoman Empire's decline in Europe began when the Christian coalition, led by King John III Sobieski of Poland, launched a spectacular counterattack that decisively defeated the Ottoman forces. It was a victory that not only preserved Vienna, but also marked a turning point in the struggle between the Christian Europeans and the Muslim Ottomans. And the Winged Hussars arrived. You know the song. Maybe you don't. Well, in any case, I will welcome you to the channel. Here we go. Siege of Vienna today. It's gonna be quite interesting. Well, I don't have to tell you to like and subscribe and do all the rest. You'll do that if you feel the need to do so. Did you do it? Good. Now, let us begin. So, the Ottoman Empire, keen on expanding its influence over the Danube region, referring to the Danube River, of course, and its tributaries, and controlling the vital overland trade routes to Germany and the eastern Mediterranean, had long since been eyeing off the great city of Vienna, the grand prize of Europe. Under Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, the Ottomans made extensive logistical preparations in the years leading up to the siege. These preparations involved rebuilding roads, bridges, infrastructure, facilitating the movement of troops, ammunition for those fancy new cannons, and artillery from across the empire into the Balkans. The stage was set for another attempt to capture Europe. Now, the Ottoman Empire's first attempt to conquer the city had been halted in 1566 during the siege of Zigetvar, which prevented Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent from advancing any further. But despite this setback, Vienna was not threatened again until 1683, although it had suffered from devastating outbreaks of disease 4 years earlier in 1679 rather, but they can hardly blame the Ottomans for that, now can't they? In the years leading up to the 1683 siege, the political situation in Hungary had been marked by, let's say, growing discontent against the Habsburgs, particularly due to Emperor Leopold I's suppression of Protestantism and his pursuit of counter-Reformation policies. You see, things were still a little bit, the wounds were fresh from these wounds inflicted upon the Church after the Protestant Reformation and the Lutherans and all the rest. Well, it was a little bit of chaos. Of course, the Ottomans were not going to let that chaos go by unused. They capitalized on the unrest, providing military support to Imre Thököly, a leader of the Hungarian Protestant and anti-Habsburg factions. Thököly had seized large parts of Hungary, particularly in the eastern regions. So we're talking present-day Slovakia and northeastern Hungary. Borders were a little bit different back then, of course. And in 1681, the Ottomans formally recognized him as the King of Upper Hungary. The Ottomans, of course, promised to assist in his efforts, including offering the Kingdom of Vienna in the event of the city's captures. Not a bad deal, that's for sure. However, not all was well. Despite the tensions, the Peace of Vassar, signed in 1664, had ensured a 20-year period of relative peace between the Ottomans and the Holy Roman Empire before hostilities resumed. Well, we can't break a contract now, can't we? By 1681 and 1682, the conflict between Thokoli's forces and the Habsburg Empire had escalated, particularly after Habsburg incursions into central Hungary. They're always sticking their jaw in where it doesn't belong. This provided Kara Mustafa Pasha with the justification he needed to gain permission from Sultan Mehmed I and his divan to mobilize the Ottoman army. So, on January the 21st, 1682, the Ottomans officially called their forces into action, and by the 6th of August in that year, war had officially been declared, setting the stage for the siege of Vienna in 1683, the following year. Of course, logistics, that is going to be important, and the logistics of an Ottoman invasion of Vienna in late 1682, well, that's a difficult task, to say the least, as the army would have arrived just as winter set in, after a 3-month campaign. As a result, the Ottomans decided to postpone their full-scale invasion, allowing the Holy Roman Empire time to mobilize their defenses. Over the following 15 months, Emperor Leopold I managed to form a crucial alliance with Poland, Venice, and even Pope Innocent XI. This was formalized in the 1683 Treaty of Warsaw, which stipulated mutual defense. Leopold promised to aid Poland if the Ottomans attacked Krakow, while Poland agreed to defend Vienna should the Ottomans strike. Well, no spoilers, but yes, they fulfilled their obligations. Well, on March 31st, 1683, Grand Vizier Merzifonlu Kara Mustafa Pasha, sent another declaration to Vienna, marking the beginning of the Ottoman army's advance from Edirne. By early May, the Ottomans had reached Belgrade, that's modern-day Serbia, and soon after, a Transylvanian army led by Prince Mihaly Apafi and Hungarian forces under Imre Thokoli joined them. Together, they laid siege to Győr, while the Ottoman force, the main one at least, numbering around 150,000 soldiers, slowly marched toward Vienna. On the 7th of July, 40,000 Crimean Tatar troops arrived just 40 kilometers from the city, nearly double the number of imperial defenders, by the way. Of course, the odds were overwhelming. Things were not looking good. Charles V, Duke of Lorraine, retreated with his 20,000-strong force towards Linz, while Emperor Leopold fled Vienna with his court and 60,000 civilians towards Passau. By the 14th of July, the main Ottoman army reached Vienna, where Count Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg and his 15,000 troops were the only line of defense remaining. Austria's pre-war strategy had assumed the battle would take place near Győr, but with the Ottomans' advance, this plan became untenable. Saxon engineer George Rimpler, hired by the Holy Roman Empire to prepare Vienna, hastily reinforced the city's defenses in anticipation of the siege. Meanwhile, in accordance with the Treaty of Warsaw, King John III Sobieski of Poland began organizing a relief expedition, intending to depart Krakow on the 15th of August, 1683. Of course, this move was all strategically timed, as Imre Thokoli was expected to attempt an invasion of Poland while the majority of the country's forces were mobilizing to aid Vienna. However, Kazimierz Jan Sapieha's campaign in the Hungarian highlands delayed the Lithuanian army's march, and they arrived in Vienna only after the city had been relieved. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Rewinding it back a little bit, tensions over Vienna's relief quickly escalated between Poland and the various German states, particularly Austria, as the question of funding became a major point of contention. Who's going to pay for all this? The primary concern was how to finance the troops' wages and supply needs while they were on the march. King Jan III Sobieski, who led the Polish forces to Vienna, insisted that he should not be held financially responsible for the army's expenses. How convenient, as it was his intention that had saved the city, his intervention rather. He argued that, given the circumstances, the Viennese could not ignore the contributions of other German troops who had also joined the relief effort. The Habsburg rulers, anxious to avoid any further complications, negotiated agreements with the Poles to keep their financial obligations minimal and scrambled to gather as much funding as possible to cover the costs of the military campaign. It all comes down to money, doesn't it? So, we arrive on the 14th of July now. The Ottoman forces, under the command of Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, had fully surrounded Vienna, launching a full-on siege of the city. On that same day, Kara Mustafa issued the customary demand for surrender, urging the inhabitants of the city to submit to Ottoman rule. The defenders of Vienna, however, were not cooperative. Led by Ernst Rediger Graf von Staremberg, the seasoned military commander, the remaining 15,000 soldiers, along with almost 9,000 volunteers, armed with 370 cannons nonetheless, refused to capitulate. The defenders' resolve was strengthened by the horrifying reports that Pechtoldorf, a town just south of Vienna, where Ottoman forces had massacred the residents after they had complied with a similar demand for surrender. Well, doesn't really inspire very much confidence, doesn't it? This gruesome event only galvanized Staremberg's forces, who were determined not to meet the same fate, and if they were, well, they were going to go down swinging. July the 17th. The operations of siege officially began, and the Ottomans with their overwhelming numbers began positioning themselves for an assault. The defenders, however, had taken measures to neutralize some of the advantages of the Ottoman forces, recognizing that any attempt to rush into the city would leave the Ottoman soldiers vulnerable to concentrated defensive fire. The Viennese defenders had destroyed many of the houses surrounding the city walls, clearing away debris and leaving behind a barren, empty plain. Very easy to pick people off like that, of course. This open area would provide little cover for the advancing Ottoman forces. In response, Kara Mustafa ordered his troops to dig long, carefully planned trench lines that extended straight toward the city. These trenches were designed to shield the advancing Ottoman soldiers from the defenders' fire, but they also signaled the beginning of a grueling and protracted siege as both sides prepared for a prolonged struggle. This was not going to be easy at all. The defenders of Vienna had a distinct advantage in artillery, of course, possessing 370 field guns and 19 medium-caliber cannons, while the Ottomans, not too bad. They had 130 of them. It's better than nothing, but it's not as good as 370. But there was a little bit of a difference. Kara Mustafa's forces were extremely determined to breach the city's fortifications, and their trick was mining tactics. They excavated tunnels beneath the walls, intending to fill them with enough black powder to destroy the city's defenses. Is this all you can conjure, Mustafa? The outer palisade which had been in place for about 150 years, was particularly vulnerable, as it was largely rotted away. In response, the defenders took the unusual step of pounding enormous tree trunks into the ground around the walls, creating an additional defensive perimeter. The strategy delayed the Ottomans' progress by nearly 3 weeks, frustrating Kara Mustafa's plans for a quick siege and buying critical time for a potential relief force to arrive. Of course, there's the issues of supplies, too. You don't want a siege to go for too long. People begin to get hungry, which is why you always offer the terms of surrender. And it's also equally why those who do not accept the terms of surrender, well, they have to be made an example of, don't they? The unfortunate reality of warfare. It's as gritty, or even more gritty than you would imagine. Now, we have to mention that some historians argue that Kara Mustafa, despite his initial aggressive strategies, hesitated to launch an all-out assault on Vienna, and this reluctance may have stemmed from the fear of looting, which was, of course, traditionally viewed as the right of conquering soldiers, and his desire to preserve the city for its riches. He didn't want to destroy it, he didn't want to rob it, he wanted to capture it, to take Vienna intact. And, well, that requires a little bit more of a gentle approach. Well, either way. Meanwhile, the Ottomans had cut off nearly all of Vienna's food supply, and that only exacerbated the defenders' desperation. The situation grew so dire that von Starhemberg, determined to maintain discipline, ordered the execution of any soldier found sleeping on duty due to fatigue. That's a rude awakening, don't you think? In August, imperial forces, led by Charles V, Duke of Lorraine, achieved a critical victory over the forces of Imre Tokoli in Bassenberg, that's just northwest of Vienna. Of course, the Ottomans did not like hearing this news, but the outcome of this battle actually prevented the defenders from succumbing to starvation and disarray, as, well, things could finally get through. Plus, there's the morale boost. Someone is coming to help us. On September the 6th, there was a decisive turning point when Sobieski's Polish forces crossed the Danube at Tulln, joining the already assembled Imperial and Allied forces. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth had also hired Zaporojian Cossack mercenaries, adding further strength to the relief army. Despite his recent annexation of Alsace, King Louis XIV of France refused to assist his Habsburg rivals, leaving the task of relieving Vienna to Sobieski's Polish army. Let's talk about Sobieski. He was a seasoned commander, definitely not new to the fight, and certainly not new to fighting the Ottomans. Well, this also included his resounding victory at the Battle of Khotyn in 1673, and he now led an army of 70,000 to 80,000 soldiers, with the Ottomans in their crosshairs. The problem was, the Ottomans outnumbered them 2 to 1. Estimated forces of 150,000. Well, give or take, it's still not good. But he had a reputation for courage and tactical brilliance that had already spread across all of Europe. Everyone was talking, and his leadership would prove crucial in this upcoming battle. So, by early September, the siege of Vienna had really received a critical point. The Ottoman forces, employing about 5,000 skilled sappers, had made significant progress in their efforts to breach the city's walls. These expert miners had repeatedly destroyed substantial sections of the fortifications, particularly between the Berg Bastion and Lobel Bastion, and the Berg Revelin, leaving gaping holes roughly 12 meters wide. In response, the Viennese defenders began excavating their own tunnels, working frantically to prevent Ottomans from filling the gaps with gunpowder, a common tactic used at this time, of course. But despite the efforts, on the 8th of September, the Ottomans were able to capture the nearby low wall and Berg Ravelin, making significant inroads into the city's defences. With this loss, the Viennese defenders prepared themselves for the inevitable breach of the city walls and steeled themselves to fight face to face with the enemy. They anticipated that once the walls were breached, they would be forced to make a final stand in the heart of the very city that they want to defend. Now, in terms of military strength, the Ottomans did have the overwhelming force, though only the numbers for the household and retinue troops are definitely known. The figure for the household army stood at 78,500, with an additional 44,200 retinue troops. But there are other figures. You see, the Ottoman army was not strictly Ottoman. We have 50,000 Tatars, 10,000 Wallachians, and 170,000 rear service personnel were approximated and perhaps even understated. We do have one historian of the period, that is Karaman Sakul, and he suggests that these numbers, while counting the household and retinue troops, do not account for the provincial forces or vassal armies. The actual numbers of provincial troops, such as the 40,000 Timarli Sipahi, Ottoman provincial cavalry, and the combined forces of vassal states, including the Crimean Khanate, would have pushed the total number of troops much higher. Of course, regardless of the specific number, the situation in Vienna was increasingly dire for the defenders. And, well, they couldn't receive any reinforcements either at this time, so even worse. The siege was relentless. Combined with overwhelming numbers, it creates a sense of urgency and desperation among the city's inhabitants. But still, despite the tremendous odds, the defenders hold firm, waiting for the crucial arrival of the relief army. As of August 12th, the Austrian ambassador Kunitz reported the Ottoman army under siege had already shrunk to 90,000 fighters. Additionally, Kunitz asserted that he had been informed by Ottoman prisoners that the Ottoman army's casualties were steadily increasing during the siege, with 20,000 of them by the end of August. Other Austrian sources report 12,000 Ottoman casualties until August 13th, 10,000 Janissaries, 12,000 Sipahi, 16,000 Belga, 6,000 engineers, 2,000 provincial Sipahi, and 2,000 Tatars were among the 48,000 or so people killed, according to a fairly accurate Ottoman account taken after the battle. But on top of this, the Ottoman army was significantly reduced by disease and desertion. And, well, that's pretty normal for a protracted siege. Like I said, you don't want to be hanging around for too long. As for the Ottoman sources, they claim that the army size dropped from 120,000 to a weary, tired 40,000. An Ottoman casualties list and Kunitz's 90,000 combatant information for August 12 are combined by Sakul, who estimates the Ottoman army to be 90,000 men. That includes 65,000 soldiers, 25,000 rear service, and the 60 guns. However, the Ottoman list is for September 10th, and Kunitz's 90,000 combatant information is for August the 12th. So there's a little bit of room for movement there. Either way, the Ottoman vassals of Moldavia, Wallachia, and Transylvania were not involved in the battle strictly because they were tasked with defending bridges on important escape routes. In contrast to earlier battles, the largely irregular Tatar horsemen showed little effectiveness in combat, and this is despite the Ottomans' expectation that the Tatar vassals would take part. With 165, or perhaps as much as 200 guns, the relief army would engage a lone 28 to 50,000 Ottoman army with 65,000 soldiers. The relief army of the Poles and the imperial forces would scramble to prepare a response in an attempt to break the siege. An efficient leadership structure, centered on the Polish king and his heavy cavalry, the Polish Hussars, was established despite the army's multinational makeup and the short 6-day period. And then we have the Holy League. They use all the government's available funds, loans from a number of affluent bankers and noblemen, and sizable sums of money from the Pope to resolve the payment dispute. Additionally, the Habsburgs and the Poles agreed that the Emperor would finance the troops after they entered imperial territory. But the Polish government would pay for its own troops while they were still in Poland. In the event of a victory, however, the Emperor would acknowledge Sobieski's claim to the first rights of plunder of the enemy camp. Ooh, we hope it's good. Less cohesive and struggling with loyalty and motivation, the combined besieging forces under Kara Mustafa found it difficult to get ready for the anticipated relief army assault, and they knew they were coming. The Khan of Crimea and his cavalry force, which numbered between 30 and 40,000, were given the task of defending the rear by Mustafa. The extent of the Tatars' involvement in the last battle before Vienna is still a little bit up for debate. When the relief force emerged from the Vienna woods and crossed the Danube on pontoon bridges, the Khan declined to attack them. Moldavia and Wallachia, Ottoman allies, would also turn out to be untrustworthy. The Prince of Moldavia, George Dukas, was taken prisoner. After Sobieski's cavalry charge, Erban Cantacuzino, who supported the Christian coalition, joined the retreat. Desiring to be the guardian of Christians on the Balkan Peninsula, Cantacuzino had negotiated with the imperial forces for Wallachia to join the Christian side. He was then promised the throne of Constantinople, the Ottoman Empire's capital, by the Habsburgs. On the Kahlenberg, above Vienna, the Confederate troops used bonfires to announce their approach. In response, the forces in Vienna dispatched Sobieski, a Polish diplomat, trader, and nobleman who spoke pretty good Turkish, on a successful spy mission to infiltrate the Turkish forces and inform the relief troops of the planned time of the joint attack. Before every unit was fully deployed, the battle had begun. The Ottoman army launched an attack at 4 a.m. on September 12th in an attempt to obstruct the Holy League's troops' deployment. The first to launch a counterattack would be the Germans. Following a fierce combat and numerous Ottoman counterattacks, Charles of Lorraine advanced with the imperial army on the left and additional imperial forces in the center, seizing several strategic locations, most notably the fortified villages of Nussdorf and Heiligenstadt. The Ottoman forces were severely damaged by the imperial army by midday, and a breakthrough was imminent. By leaving the bridge over the Danube on Britannau Island, where the Wallachians had been positioned to cover the Ottoman army's left flank, Cantacuzino and his soldiers, who were covertly supporting the Christian coalition, remember, were attempting to undermine the Ottoman siege. Most of Mustafa Pasha's forces launched counterattacks, but he kept some of his best Janissary and Sipahi units in reserve for a simultaneous attack on the city. Before Sobieski's forces arrived, the Ottoman leadership had attempted but ultimately failed to take Vienna. You see, to break through the walls, the sappers had planned a huge, massive last-minute explosion beneath the Lobelbaste. 10 mines, in all, were scheduled to detonate. But luckily for the defenders, they found them and disarmed them all. Nothing personal, kid. Better luck next time. As the Polish infantry advanced on the Ottoman right flank in the early afternoon, the battlefield became a scene of intense conflict. Despite the arrival of the relief army, Ottoman forces continued their desperate attempts to breach Vienna's defenses. They were not going to let it go easily. And a major battle broke out across the vast plains. The Polish troops under the command of Sobieski began to press forward, and by 4 p.m. they had successfully captured the village of Gerstov, a critical position that would serve as the base for their famous cavalry charge. The combined Polish and Imperial forces, with Sobieski leading the charge himself alongside Charles of Lorraine, placed the Ottoman army in a perilous situation. Both commanders, acting independently, made the crucial decision to launch an offensive that would soon spell disaster for the Ottomans. Around 3:30 p.m., the German forces resumed their assault on the Ottoman left front. Initially, they encountered strong opposition. The progress had stalled. However, by 5 p.m., the momentum had shifted, and the Germans were able to push forward, capturing the villages of Oberdobling and Unterdobling. This breakthrough allowed the Polish cavalry to begin its long-anticipated charge, just as the Imperial forces were preparing for a final assault on the Ottoman central position. The mood among the defenders was perhaps one of nervous anticipation, but also quite a lot of hope. They had a chance now, a chance to live, a chance for Vienna to live. As the Polish cavalry appeared from the nearby forest, their wings glittering in the sunlight, a cheer rose from the waiting infantry, who could see that the reinforcements had arrived. The cavalry, primarily composed of the famed Polish Winged Hussars, had already demonstrated their prowess with a probing charge at 4 p.m. Despite suffering significant casualties, the Hussars' attack revealed the vulnerabilities of the Ottoman lines and gave the infantry a much-needed morale boost. The cavalry's position was now under threat from 3 directions: the Austrians to the north, the Saxons and Bavarians to the northwest, and the Poles to the direct west. The pressure from these 3 forces proved to be overwhelming for the Ottomans. Faced with the imminent collapse of their position, the Ottoman Vizier, Mustafa Pasha, made the fateful decision to abandon the siege and withdraw to his main camp farther to the south. However, by this point, much of his army had already begun to retreat from the battlefield without even waiting for his command. Run for your lives, it seems. The decision to fall back, while crucial for saving the remainder of the Ottoman forces, marked the beginning of the end for the Ottoman siege of Vienna. As the Ottoman troops fled, the victory for the European forces was complete. The Ottoman siege had been decisively broken, and the relief army's timely intervention had saved Vienna, ensuring that the Habsburgs and their allies had gained the upper hand in the struggle against the Ottomans. The battlefield, which had once been a scene of chaos, a scene of bloodshed, now laid silent, with the Ottomans in full retreat, the defenders cheering in triumph. The relief force was now prepared for the final charge. Around 6 p.m., the Polish king gave the order for 4 contingents of cavalry, 3 Polish and 1 from the Holy Roman Empire, to attack. The largest cavalry charge in history saw 18,000 horsemen charge down from the hills. Sobieski spearheaded the assault with 3,000 Polish Winged Hussars and their heavy lancers. To differentiate themselves from the Tatars fighting on the Ottoman side, Polish Lipka Tatars wore a sprig of straw in their helmets, which was not as cool as the wings, but, well, you do what you can with what you have, I suppose. Now the Ottomans, who were already completely worn out and completely discouraged, well, they did not put much of a fight. The battle lines were swiftly broken by the charge. You can't blame them. It was a bad day, and a long one at that. The remaining Viennese garrison sallied out of its defences to join the assault, while the cavalry advanced directly on the Ottoman camps and the headquarters of Kara Mustafa himself. After the sapping attempt failed, the city was attacked, and the Holy League advanced on the Turkenschanze, that is the Ottoman camp, main part of it. The Ottoman forces were then worn out and completely demoralized. The Holy League forces won the battle and successfully defended Vienna less than 3 hours after the decisive cavalry charge. Louis William, Margrave of Baden-Baden, led his dragoons into the city, making him the first Catholic to actually do so, by the way. The famous quote from Julius Caesar, "Veni, vidi, vici," "I came, I saw, I conquered," was later paraphrased by Sobieski, "Venimus, vidimus, Deus visit." We came, we saw, God conquered. Many surviving civilians are taken to slavery in the Ottoman Empire by the Ottoman troops during the siege, when they pillaged the surrounding countryside. And there was that massacre that occurred at Berchtoldsdorf outside of Vienna, where the Ottomans massacred the men while enslaving all the women and children. After resisting the invasion and securing themselves in the village's church fortress, Berchtoldsdorf did consent to that surrender when the Ottomans assured them their lives and their property would be safe in return. But of course, as we had said, the Ottomans captured the villagers' men in the marketplace, took their weapons, and then they slaughtered them all. The women and children were then taken as slaves, as kafir, war prisoners. But think about it in this way. If the Ottomans have honored their peace terms, then perhaps those in Vienna might have actually surrendered. They do themselves quite a disservice by not honoring those terms and ending up doing what they did. Because, of course, what other choice would the Viennese have but to fight to the death? If surrendering meant death too, you may as well go down swinging, like I said. Of course, although men were also enslaved, the Ottomans typically killed adult men in favor of enslaving women and children. In all, about 57,000 people, including 6,000 men, 11,000 married women, about 15,000 unmarried women under the age of 26, 200 or so were noble women, and of course about 27,000 children were abducted and taken as slaves during the Ottoman conquest of the Austrian and Hungarian border region in 1683 alone. Now, if that's not something to fight against, I don't know what is. The Ottoman Empire still had suffered its greatest defeat and failure since the establishment of Ottoman statehood in 1299. This was really the worst thing that ever happened to them. Well, according to Podorekti, the Ottomans lost at least 20,000 men during the siege, while others estimate that they lost between 8 and 15,000, 5 to 10,000 captured during the battle with Sobieski's forces. The relief force, commanded by Sobieski, suffered far fewer casualties, with about 3,500 killed and injured, and that includes about 1,300 Poles. Of course, they were right at the front lines. There are also estimates of 4,500, which is a little bit higher, but it's nothing ridiculous. Now, during the siege, the 10,000-strong Viennese garrison and the civilian population lost roughly half of their original numbers for various reasons. Illness, stray cannonballs, and all the rest. Just the general hopelessness of the situation, I suppose. Now, a few days after the battle, Sobieski wrote to his wife about the significant loot that the Holy League troops and the Viennese had taken from the Ottoman army. Remember, he had first pick on that, And this is what he said. Ours are treasures unheard of, tents, sheep, cattle, and no small number of camels. It is a victory as nobody ever knew before. The enemy now completely ruined. Everything lost for them. They must run for their sheer lives. General Starenburg hugged and kissed me and called me his savior. End of the letter from Sobieski. Well, in order to protect Vienna from a potential Ottoman counterattack, Starenburg promptly ordered the severely damaged fortifications to be repaired. But it didn't matter too much. The Ottomans would never again lay siege to Vienna. Now, a few months later, on December 25th, Kara Mustafa Pasha was actually put to death in Belgrade by the Janissary Aga by strangulation, with a silk rope that was pulled on by multiple men on either end, due to his defeat in the battle. Bad luck for him, I suppose. Tension did, however, remain between the different commanders and their armies even after the Christian Catholic allies won, because Sobieski insisted that Polish troops be given preference when it came to the Ottoman camp's loot. German and Austrian troops ended up with smaller shares. Furthermore, the Catholic residents of the Viennese countryside allegedly verbally abused the Protestant Saxons who had come to relieve the city. Without taking part in the distribution of the loot, the Saxons left the battle right away and declined to pursue further. Safavid Iran celebrated the Ottoman defeat at Vienna. The news was reported so spectacularly that Suleiman I, the then current emperor, or Shah, contemplating marching to Baghdad, which had fallen to the Ottomans in 1639 due to the Treaty of Zuhab. In the end, the Safavids would not launch another campaign, because worried state officials, particularly the ruling eunuch faction in the royal court, knew about the Safavids' military's waning power, and because of that they did not think it was wise. Now, the eunuchs, at least according to Professor Rudi Marthe, were not against the idea of having the Ottomans suffer some humiliation, but they did not want their power destroyed, for fear that this would remove a buffer against Christian Europe. Either way, the triumph of Vienna prepared the way for Louis of Baden, Maximilian II Emmanuel of Bavaria, and Prince Eugene of Savoy to conquer Hungary and, temporarily, territories like the Balkans in the ensuing years. After 16 more years of fighting, the Ottomans finally lost control of Transylvania and Hungary. In 1699, the Holy Roman Empire and the Ottoman Empire signed the Treaty of Karlowitz, which gave the Habsburgs control over a large portion of Hungary. The Ottoman Empire's historic European expansion came to an end with this battle. French-German animosity was, of course, heightened by Louis XIV of France's actions, and the War of the Reunions erupted in the western regions of the weakened Holy Roman Empire in the following month. No breaks from the fighting, I'm afraid. Now on to the Feast of the Holy Name of Mary, which had previously only been observed in Spain and the Kingdom of Naples. Well, this was now extended to the entire church by Pope Innocent XI in remembrance of Sobieski's victory, because he had entrusted his kingdom to the protection of the Virgin Mary prior to the battle. Previously, it was celebrated on the Sunday within the octave of the Nativity of Mary, that is, between September 9th and the 15th of September. When Pope Pius X wanted to make room for the celebration of the actual Sundays, it was moved to September 12th, the day of the victory. The Polish-crowned white eagle would be added to the papal coat of arms by the Pope. The Pope also bestowed upon the Polish king the title of Defender of the Faith, Defensor Fidei, following his victory at the Battle of Vienna. And the Austrians built a church on the top of the Kallenberg Hill, north of Vienna, specifically to honor Sobieski. Well, thank you very much for listening to that. It was good fun, wasn't it? Quite an epic story. The Winged Hussars. Oh, yes. You know the reference. Maybe you tell me in the comments. I think they've fallen off a little bit lately. Not the comments, I mean. The band. Okay. Anyway, I'm going to thank the top-tier patrons and the supporters. Dark, Kimberly, Christine, Sally, Ember, Susan, Cameron, Legitmus, Carrie, Charlene, Linteries, Katiana, Nicholas, Ulfednir, Alexander, Charles, Christine, Dr. Neuronerd, Erin, Jaden, Jim, Jeffrey, Jessica, Madeline, Melissa, Orthodox Review, Scott, Stark Factory, Shell, Wendy, Josie, Sarah, Video Man, and Ryan. Did you like how I rolled the R there? Very cool. Well, everyone, that's enough for me tonight. And I will see you in the next exciting video. Excelsior. Good night, everyone. Lots of love to you all.